In this next little section here, we'll look at factoring perfect square trinomials. So remember that our perfect square trinomials look like this. Okay, so if we had, for example, a squared plus 2ab plus b squared. Okay, when we factored that, our special pattern is going to be a plus b squared. Okay, or in other words, a plus b times a plus b. Okay, our other perfect square binomial was just slightly different. It's when we had a squared minus 2ab plus b squared, right? And when we factored that, we'd end up with this pattern of a minus b squared, or in other words, a minus b times a minus b. Okay, are those two quantities being multiplied by each other? Okay, so it's really important that we understand that when we see this positive middle term, okay, this plus 2ab, we know that it's going to be this red special factoring pattern that we use. And when we see this negative middle term, it's going to be the green special pattern that we actually use. But remember, well, we're still looking at all of these front terms here, so that the front and the back term, this has to be a perfect square and this has to be a perfect square in order to use the pattern, right? This has to be a perfect square and this has to be a perfect square, okay? And in part C, this 3 has to be a perfect square and the 75 has to be a perfect square, right? So you can see in part C that 3 and 75 are not perfect squares, so we're probably going to have to do something for that particular example to make it work. But let's go back to part A and let's figure this out. Okay, so we're looking at now x squared minus 4x plus 4. So I look at that A term, that first term there. I see that's a perfect square. The last term is a perfect square. And I see that this middle number here is actually negative. So I'm leaning more towards the green pattern here. Okay, this is going to be an A minus B pattern. Okay, so let's or a minus b squared. All right, so let's maybe just write it like this. Let's write this as go ahead and write this as a squared minus 2 times a times b plus b squared, which would be like this, right? So 2 times a times b, well, this would be 2 times x times 2. Okay, and then this would be minus b squared, so this would be 2 squared. All right, so if we're following this special pattern here, this is kind of what we've got going. Okay, now remember when we actually factor this, this is just going to be a minus b squared. Okay, so this will be just x minus 2 squared is going to be our final answer. Okay, or you could write that as x minus 2 times x minus 2. Now, when we actually go ahead and check our answer here, again, this is just x minus 2 times x minus 2. We'll just FOIL this. We'll make sure that x times x is x squared. The outside numbers is negative 2x. The inside numbers is another negative 2x. And last times last will give you this positive 4. So when we combine like terms, we end up with this particular pattern. Okay, so obviously, again, our answer is totally correct. I understand if you don't want to show that much work, okay, especially like this part right here. Okay, to me, after a while, that part is just sort of pointless after we learn the pattern. Okay, but let's look at another example. Okay, so in part B, we've got 16y squared plus 24y plus 9. Okay, and so we're kind of leaning towards the red pattern now because our middle term here is positive. Okay, and so we can try to write this down as our pattern like this. Okay, so if you want to, we can write this down as 4y squared plus 2 times our a term, which is 4y, times our b term here, which is going to end up being 3. Okay, and then finally plus our b term here, which is being squared. So this would be a 3 squared. Okay, that's a bad parenthesis. Sorry about that. And so this is what we'll end up with now. Okay, and so we can write this again as this is just now going to be a plus b squared, or in other words, 4y plus 3 squared. And that would be technically our final answer here, if we were to factor it. Okay. Now again, remember this is 4y plus 3 times 4y plus 3, so we can always FOIL this to see if we're correct. So this would give us now 16y squared plus 12y plus 12y plus 9. And when we combine like terms here, we actually get what we started with, which is always a good thing, right? It means that we did this properly, okay? Now this very last one here, again, we notice that our term here is negative, okay? And so let's now look at this. The first thing I actually want to do is, I notice that 3 and 75 are not actually perfect squares, so I will, I'm going to try to factor 3 out here, right? So if I take a 3 out and I divide every single term here by 3, let's see what happens, okay? So this will give me now x squared, 30 divided by 3 is going to give me 10, right? So minus 10x, and 75 divided by 3 here is going to give me 25, so plus 25, okay? And now I can see, well, now this, 1x squared is a perfect square, 25 is a perfect square, so I'm good to go. All right, I still notice that this term in the middle here is negative, so I'm going to be leaning more towards my green pattern on this one, okay? And so I'll write this out as 3 multiplied by, if I want to say a squared, well, in this case, our a would be x, so it says x squared minus 2ab, okay? Well, our a term here, if you want to call it that, is going to be x, and our b term here is going to be, well, it comes from the 25, that's 5 times 5, okay? And then plus b squared, so this would just look like this, okay? Now, in the end, our final pattern here will just look like 3 multiplied by x minus 5 squared, okay? And this would be our final answer. 3 multiplied by the quantity of x minus 5 that's squared. Okay, now we can always, again, FOIL this to see if we're actually correct. So 3 times x minus 5 times x minus 5. I'll go ahead and FOIL this to get x squared minus 5x plus 25. Okay, and when I actually multiply this through, I'll get 3x squared minus 30x plus 75, right? So I know that my answer is actually correct, okay? Again, I know this might be slightly confusing right now, so I think it's important that you guys watch the next video and maybe get just a little bit more practice with this.